The global birth rate collapse. Why every fix has failed so far. The global birth rate collapse is not a single country story or a temporary dip. It is a broad, multi-decade decline in how many children people actually have, showing up across much of Europe, North America, East Asia, and increasingly in parts of Latin America, the Middle East, and South Asia. It matters now because fertility decline compounds. It changes the age structure of whole societies, then rewrites everything built on more workers than retirees, tax bases, pension math, housing demand, labor markets, innovation, and even geopolitics. The hard part is that the usual fixes target the visible symptom babies rather than the underlying system family formation under modern life. Many policies can nudge timing. Far fewer change the lived constraints that determine whether people start families at all and whether they go from one child to two. The story turns on whether modern societies can make parenthood compatible with the lives they now require adults to build. Key points. Fertility decline is driven less by people don't want kids and more by delayed family formation, higher opportunity costs, and a widening gap between work, housing, and caregiving. Many interventions raise births briefly by shifting timing, but do not raise completed family size over a lifetime. Cash bonuses help at the margin, but the core constraint is often time, stability, and affordable space, not a one-off payment. Childcare supply and job security matter more than slogans, but they are slow, expensive, and politically hard to build at scale. Where childbirth is tightly linked to marriage, falling partnership rates can reduce births even if fertility desire stays stable. Gender role mismatch is a major bottleneck. When women's education and careers modernize faster than men's share of unpaid work, fertility tends to fall. The most realistic fix is not a return to replacement-level fertility everywhere, but a managed adaptation, higher productivity, later retirement, smarter migration, and family-friendly systems that prevent fertility from collapsing further. What's happening? The global birth rate collapse is best understood as a decline in fertility, not just a decline in births. Birth counts can fall because a country has fewer women of childbearing age. Fertility decline means that even after accounting for age structure, the average number of children per woman is falling. This is not a uniform global decline. Some regions still have higher fertility, but the direction is widespread. More countries are moving below replacement-level fertility and fewer are sustaining the two-child norm in practice. What it is not, a single simple kids are too expensive story. Money matters, but so do time, space, stability, partnership patterns and norms about what good parenting requires. How it works. Fertility falls through a chain of decisions that look personal but behave like a system. First, modern societies extend the launch runway. More education and training pushes stable careers later. That delays the age at which many people feel ready for children. Second, the first child becomes the hardest step. It is not just an extra mouth to feed. It can mean a structural redesign of adult life, commuting, housing, job flexibility, sleep, identity, and relationship dynamics. If the first step looks risky, many never take it, and everything downstream collapses. Third, delay changes biology and logistics. Even with modern medicine, fertility declines with age, and the time window for having multiple children narrows. When the first child arrives later, the second becomes harder to schedule, afford, or physically manage. Fourth, the cost structure shifts from how much does a child cost to how much life does a child require. In many high-income settings, expectations for safe neighborhoods, good schools, enrichment, and hands-on parenting rise. Parents respond rationally by having fewer children and investing more in each. Fifth, partnership dynamics increasingly matter. If stable relationships form later or less often, births fall, especially in countries where childbearing outside marriage is rare or socially penalized. A society can become low fertility simply by becoming low partnership. Finally, institutions lock in the new normal. Workplaces designed around long hours and constant availability punish caregivers. Housing markets price space as a luxury. Public services often ration childcare. The result is a coordination problem. Individuals might want children in the abstract, but the system makes it hard to act on that desire. Numbers that matter. Replacement level is often summarized as about 2.1 births per woman. That is not a magical constant, but a rule of thumb that depends on mortality and other demographic details. The key point is that once a society sits well below replacement for long enough, it will age rapidly and eventually shrink without migration. Global fertility is now close to replacement in the aggregate, but the average hides extremes. A world where some regions remain high fertility and others become ultra-low fertility is not demographically stable. It is structurally imbalanced, with growth concentrated in fewer places and aging concentrated in many others. An average around 1.5 births per woman across rich country groupings is a different regime. At that level, each new generation is materially smaller than the last, unless offset by migration. Over decades, that changes everything from school capacity to military recruitment pools. Ultra-low fertility countries are the warning lights. When a society falls below roughly 1 birth per woman, the decline is no longer a gentle glide. It becomes a rapid inversion of the population pyramid, with cascading fiscal and labor effects. Timing is a number 2. Even if people still want 2 children, having the first child later compresses the remaining time for a second or third. Policies that do not shift timing earlier often fail because the biological and logistical window closes. Another anchoring figure is the scale of public spending required to change lived constraints. Childcare capacity, paid leave design, housing supply, and job security reforms are not cheap. Modest, fragmented programs tend to produce modest, fragmented results, where it works and where it breaks. Some policies do work, just not in the way politicians often promise. Expanded childcare supply can raise fertility by making it feasible to combine work and parenting. It tends to matter most for the second child because parents who already crossed the first child threshold are sensitive to whether life with 2 is survivable. Well-designed parental leave can help, especially when it protects employment and supports both parents. But leave can also backfire if it is structured in ways that reduce career prospects, concentrate caregiving on mothers, or make employers quietly discriminate. Cash benefits and baby bonuses can increase births in the short run, but often by shifting timing. They help families already near the margin, but rarely rebuild the deeper foundations: affordable space, stable jobs, predictable schedules, and social norms that support shared caregiving. Housing support can be powerful because space is a hard constraint, not a preference. But housing is politically and economically difficult to fix quickly. If housing supply stays tight, subsidies can simply raise prices. Fertility treatments help individuals and can reduce involuntary childlessness, but they are not a population-level solution if the main bottleneck is that people delay having children until it becomes medically difficult. What breaks most strategies is partiality. Policies arrive as a patchwork, a check without childcare, leave without job security, moral messaging without housing, incentives without time. Fertility is a system outcome. Partial inputs produce partial outputs. Analysis, scientific and engineering reality. Fertility is an emergent property of millions of household-level decisions interacting with institutions. Treat it like a control system, and you see why turn-the-dial policies disappoint. The system responds most to constraints, not rhetoric. If the binding constraint is time, long hours, long commutes, unpredictable schedules, then money alone will not free the time. If the binding constraint is housing space, then childcare subsidies will not conjure an extra bedroom. A major measurement trap is confusing period fertility with lifetime fertility. If a policy causes people to have a child earlier than they otherwise would, the annual fertility rate rises. That can look like success even if the total number of children those cohorts eventually have does not change much. What would falsify the constraints dominate interpretation? A large, sustained fertility rebound in settings where housing, work hours, childcare and partnership patterns remain unchanged. That would imply preference shifts alone can reverse decline. That is not what most observed rebounds look like. Economic and market impact. Low fertility reshapes labor supply. Over time, fewer new workers enter the economy, bargaining power can shift, and firms face tighter recruitment. unless automation, higher participation, or immigration fill the gap. It also changes demand. Aging societies buy different things: more healthcare, fewer starter homes, different consumption patterns. That affects everything from urban planning to venture capital risk appetite. For governments, the big story is fiscal math. When the ratio of workers to retirees falls, spending pressures rise and tax bases strain. That pushes policy toward later retirement, higher taxes, or reduced benefits, each of which can further affect family decisions. Near-term pathways tend to be work around it, attract migrants, raise participation, keep older people working longer. Long-term pathways require productivity gains, especially via automation, and redesigned family support systems that keep fertility from falling into ultra-low territory. Security, privacy, and misuse risks. Pronatalist policy can drift into coercion, surveillance, or discrimination if governments treat births as a national security KPI. That risk rises when leaders frame low fertility as national extinction or blame specific groups. Data misuse is another vector. Fertility and pregnancy data can become sensitive political infrastructure if tied to benefits, monitoring, or policing of reproductive behavior. Even well-intended programs can create systems that are easy to weaponize in polarized politics. A more common risk is misunderstanding. Overclaiming simple fixes can erode trust when they fail, feeding backlash, cynicism, and politicization of family life. Social and cultural impact. Fertility decline changes how adulthood is paced. When more people are childless or have one child, social life, workplaces, and even cities adapt around that norm. That can reduce the informal support networks that help people raise children, reinforcing low fertility. It also changes gender politics. If the practical burden of child-rearing remains uneven, women may rationally avoid or delay parenthood. Societies that do not solve the caregiving distribution problem often see fertility fall further. There are second-order effects too. Political incentives tilt toward older voters, education systems reconfigure, intergenerational wealth becomes more important, and immigration becomes a more central political flashpoint. What most coverage misses. Most coverage treats fertility as a kids are expensive problem and then debates how much money to hand out. The deeper issue is that the first child is a life structure problem, not a line item problem. People do not just buy a child. They redesign everything. The hidden variable is coordination. Family formation requires two people's timelines to align, plus housing, plus job stability, plus caregiving capacity. Modern life often makes those alignments harder, not easier. When coordination fails, fertility falls even if stated ideal family size stays high. The second overlooked point is that many policies are designed to be visible, not effective. One-time payments photograph well. Childcare capacity, housing supply, and shorter working hours are slower, less glamorous, and politically harder. But they are closer to the actual bottlenecks. Why this matters? The global birth rate collapse affects everyone, but not evenly. In the short term, it hits employers, cities, and public services, staffing shortages, school closures in some areas, higher healthcare demand in others, and tighter fiscal trade-offs. In the long term, it reshapes national power. Countries with fast-aging populations face slower growth, higher defense and welfare trade-offs, and greater reliance on automation or migration. Countries with younger populations hold more demographic momentum, but also face pressure to create jobs and stability. Milestones to watch include major childcare supply expansions, housing reforms that materially increase family-sized housing, shifts in working hour norms, and immigration policy changes large enough to alter labor force trajectories. Another trigger is any move toward coercive pronatalism, which signals political stress rather than demographic confidence. Real-world impact. A couple in a high-cost city wants 2 children. They can afford daycare for one, barely. The second child would require either a bigger home or one partner stepping back at work. They stop at 1, not because they hate the idea of 2, but because the system makes 2 feel like a controlled demolition. A mid-sized employer struggles to retain women after maternity leave because the role assumes late meetings and travel. The firm raises pay, but churn continues. Without flexibility redesign, higher wages do not solve the time conflict. A government adds a baby bonus and sees a short bump in births. 2 years later, fertility is back down. The policy moved timing but did not change housing, childcare, or workplace norms, so completed family size barely shifts. A country increases childcare subsidies but cannot expand childcare places fast enough. Parents have money but no slot. The constraint remains physical capacity, not willingness. The road ahead. The next decade is unlikely to deliver a single dramatic reversal. More plausible is a set of diverging paths. One scenario is managed adaptation. Fertility stays below replacement but stabilizes at a level that avoids free fall. Work becomes more flexible, childcare expands, men's caregiving rises, and migration plus automation fill labor gaps. If we see sustained childcare capacity growth and working hour norms shifting, it could lead to this steadier plateau. A second scenario is deeper decline. Housing remains tight, careers stay unstable, and family formation keeps drifting later. More people miss the window for a second child, and some never start. If we see continued rises in age at first birth alongside stagnant housing supply and long-hour work cultures, it could lead to ultra-low fertility in more countries. A third scenario is political overreaction. Governments pursue coercive or punitive pronatalism, triggering backlash, emigration of young adults, and greater gender conflict. If we see reproductive policy tied to surveillance, penalties, or nationalist scapegoating, it could lead to lower trust and worse outcomes. A fourth scenario is partial technological relief without social redesign. More egg freezing, more IVF access, and incremental medical gains help some individuals but do not change population-level fertility much. If we see rapid expansion of fertility treatment access without parallel progress on housing, childcare, and work design, it could lead to better individual outcomes but minimal demographic change. What to watch next is not the next bonus or campaign. Watch whether societies rebuild the conditions that make family formation feasible: predictable time, affordable space, stable work, and shared caregiving. Without those, every fix will keep failing for the same reason. More insight, less noise. Subscribe and explore the full range at taylortaylor.co.uk.